Baruch Hashem. So happy to be here with you.
I'm great to be here. Thank you.
Great. Great. Good morning. Nisim. It's good to see your shining face. Excited to be spending Shabbat with you in Hebron.
Very excited as well.
Very good.
With the forefathers as well.
I thought there were three.
The three fathers and the forefathers.
The three forefathers. It's confusing. It's your religion.
Wait, that's what the shin was on doing, right?
Exactly. Okay, so with your permission, Russell just had a great experience last night of his attending his first Jewish wedding. It wasn't his own, but and he asked me yesterday what to expect. Boy, I didn't know what to say. But one thing I said is to expect it to be long. Was I right, Russell?
Oh, 100%.
Russell,
I have a very important question. How was the food?
Amazing.
Amazing. So I asked Russell to take a few minutes and tell us his experiences and what impressed you for the first time being at a Jewish, I imagine, Orthodox wedding. So what was it like? So long. When did it start? When did it end? And what was the highlight, or what was strange, or what was good, or what questions? Please give us some impressions, and then we'll discuss from there.
Right. So it seemed that things started around 7 o'clock. That was whenever everyone's done. We arrived a bit later because of transportation issues. We got there maybe about 7:30, and it was right before they started the Sheva Brachot. And then so that went on for about 30 minutes. Different people coming up, being given the honor of saying each bracha, and
That's usually called, I think, the chuppah.
okay.
Under the chuppah, we say 7 blessings. You mean right there, standing under canopy, right?
Right.
That's the start. That's the main part of the wedding, actually. That's where the actual wedding takes place, under that canopy. And you're right, there are 7 blessings there. But there are other periods where we do shed the 7 blessings, not under the chuppah. So we usually call those the Sheva Brachot. And the chuppah we call the chuppah. So
Okay.
the terminology was going to be confusing, so I'm just interrupting you for a second.
No, thank you.
But anyways, you got there for the chuppah, it was in the middle of the chuppah.
Right. We actually got there right as I believe it was the Chatan said Shechetian.
Amazing. So okay,
Right.
great.
And so then under the Chuppah they said all the blessings. And I believe after the blessings they drank wine. They shared wine between the Chatan and the Kala, and then after that so much partying. Just they couldn't even come out from the Chuppah. There were so many people crowded in front of it dancing. I mean, it's like they filled all the steps leading up to it. It was kind of like on our raised platform. It was a couple of friends of ours from the university that we. A young couple.
It was in Jerusalem?
It was in a yeshuv about maybe 45 minutes out of Jerusalem.
Okay.
If I'm mistaken. I can't remember the name of the yeshuv.
It's all right.
It was a religious one, but
Okay.
and this very wonderful wedding facility, right outside of the yeshuv. And so then it went from there. The Chatan and the Kala were gone for a short while. Everyone
They disappeared. Where'd they go? I get so confused by that. Separate. So there's something called a cheder yichud, right, which means a room of seclusion. And this is a custom. Not all communities do this. It's actually a little problematic, according to some opinions. And what I like to explain usually is that people don't recognize that the marriage is a big deal. No, people know that. Marriage is a big deal, they know. But because of that, it's a process. Process.
Oh, a process is a verb, process is a noun.
So this is a process. So there's a few stages to it. And you mentioned some of the stages, of course, the chuppah, the blessings under the chuppah, and you missed some of it. We're not going to go through all the stages. But then, of course, there's the partying, there's the meal, which we'll hear more about in a minute. But there is a stage, according to the Ashkenazi custom, where right after the chuppah, now what is the chuppah? It's the canopy with the 4 poles. It's sort of like a makeshift house. And the Chatan is supposed to bring his wife into his house. Now there's no walls, so not much privacy. But it's a symbolic house. Some rabbis said, okay, but before you get married, you're not supposed to be secluded with a woman. Afterward, if you're married, the act of marriage includes seclusion. The husband has to take her into his house. Now, he doesn't live in the hall in the day. They would actually make a tent for the week of the Sheva Brachot where they would live. So going to the wedding would be going to the husband and wife's, the bride and groom's home. And so, of course, he was bringing her into his home. He had a new home. Maybe you can imagine a big Bedouin tent that they would make with different compartments, for celebrations. And, of course, they had their dwelling area. But nowadays, we go to a hall, in those cases, these parties anyways. And in the hall, it's not his home. So they designate a room, which is called the Cheder Yichud, the room of seclusion, where the Chatan takes his wife. And usually it's right after the chuppah, right after they said the brachot, and they're now newlyweds. And 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes it gets longer, they have some private time with all the hundreds of people. How many people were at the wedding?
It would easily hundreds.
Easily hundreds. So, you're getting married, it's very intimate between you and your wife. You want to have a few moments alone, so it's actually a very nice little breather for the husband, for the bride and groom, right after the actual ceremony, to have some few moments alone. But as I said, it's part of the halachic process. This is even more about, maybe a little bit more symbolic. It's actually more like the husband bringing her into his home, and right away I'll clear up the misconception that they don't do anything. This is not where they're supposed to consummate the marriage, if you know what I mean. You're not allowed to really, it's considered to be immodest to have relations in a public place like this. It's not a hotel room. It's not a place for relations. It's just a private room where halachically it has to be valid as a secluded room, that nobody else has access to it. There's no windows where people can see, and so theoretically they could get together sexually, but the fact that they're secluded in such a room gives it the halachic status of another stage of the marriage process. And so that's where they disappear to. And that's why, because I'll answer questions in a minute. And that's why, because it's part of the halachic process, and it gives them a little breather. And halachically, you actually have eidim that stand outside the door to make sure that they've been in there the requisite amount of time. It's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it is. Each rabbi can argue. Sorry?
So it's locked from the inside and locked from the outside. Reach to the ring for the right.
Yeah, it doesn't really have to be locked, but at the end of the 5-10 minutes, the witnesses that are standing outside, to make sure nobody else comes in and interrupts them, they knock on the door, say, now your halachic time alone is over. It's up to you now. You want to talk longer? Talk longer. There's just hundreds of people waiting for you outside. Just wink, wink. We don't want you to take too long because we want to start the party. In any case, sometimes right after that, another reason why it gets extended, this time when they disappear, is because in many communities, that's the time to take pictures. Why did they take pictures beforehand? The families take pictures together. Why? There's a custom among many Ashkenazi Jews and some Sephardim as well. The husband and wife don't see each other before the chuppah, and so they can't take pictures together. And so this is the first chance that they can actually take pictures together. And you want to have wedding pictures and then the families together. And beforehand they're all separated. And so you have the Cheder Yichud, like I said, 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 15, maybe 20. If the couple has a lot to talk about, I don't know. Another thing they do in there, by the way, I will mention one more thing, one more custom. Again, this is a custom not in all communities, is that the Chatan and Kala on the day of their wedding, they fast. They do not eat or drink, because it's a day of tshuva, of repentance.
Custom, right?
Primarily Ashkenazi, yeah. Although it's quite universal today.
Why is that? Why do they fast?
As a method of tshuva. Fasting is associated with repentance. They say that the day a man gets married and a woman gets married is like Yom Kippur. It's like their day of atonement. It's like when they get reborn. It's a fresh start. And so you get cleansed from all your sins. So if you're cleansing all your sins, fasting is appropriate. So if they're fasting all day and then they're supposed to go dance and party all night, when are they going to eat? So many times they leave the Chatan and Kala meal in the Cheder Yichud And right after the ceremony, they get a few moments alone, so they get to talk and they get to, they get to eat and have some quiet time. And then they come out of that and they go to pictures. Depends how big the family is, how good the photographer is. Could take another half an hour, and then that's why the Chatan and Kala basically disappear in the middle of the wedding for about an hour. Now I'll give the floor back to Russell. But before Russell continues with the description of the wedding he participated in last night, there were some questions about this stage. I think Ruben wanted to ask something about the Chari Yichud or something else.
I can wait till Russell's done. It was more just on some of the songs that they did at the wedding.
Oh, you were there too?
No, I was curious to hear.
Oh, curious. Okay,
Like
that's a more general question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something about what I said up till now about the process, the different stages that this new stage, maybe you've never heard of, this idea of having a cheder yichud, a room of seclusion. Yes.
So, well, this is a more general question about wedding, but when a lot of us were at Aryeh Shapiro's wedding last Thursday.
Okay.
He was the madrich for the English.
He was, yeah. He doesn't know all the people. That's why not everybody could get to come.
No. But a lot of the people in here were there.
Some do.
Yeah. So, but what I remember at his wedding is everyone started singing Lechadodi, which I know it's a song that or personifies the Shabbat as a bride.
Right.
But it's a specifically a specifically Shabbos song.
Right.
But everyone was singing it. So is it also commonly sung at weddings?
So it's interesting. The song doesn't actually mention the Shabbat. You're correct. We sing it on the Erev Shabbat, but the difference between a simile and a metaphor, and it's not explicit, right? It just talks about a lover and the bride, and so it makes sense to use the song for a wedding, even though you're right. The original context, it was meant as a metaphor for the Shabbat. So it is common. I wouldn't say there's many different songs sung, but it didn't surprise me. Yes, Serge?
I was talking to one of the other Talmudim who's sitting across from me on the table. He said another reason to not do the consummation in the Yehud is because after the consummation, she halachically has to cover her hair. She comes out in front of hundreds of people. They'll see it. They'll know. It'll be embarrassing. So that's yet another reason to not do it in the Yehud.
Correct. Correct. That's another consideration. Some people say that even if they don't consummate marriage, the very fact that they're Chari Yichud means that she has to put on hair covering. The married women have to cover their hair. So some people say they should wear something, but some they leave the veil that's pinned to her hair. They leave that in. That's a little bit like a hair covering. Some people say no, it's not really until they go home at night. Then she has to cover her hair like married women do. But you're right. That's part of the debate about whether. That's why some Sephardi customs they don't have the Chari Yichud because it just complicates things. Wait till you get home at night, and there's no. Many of them do sit for a few minutes and have some private time, but without any witnesses, without not the lock. They don't make sure that it's a halachic seclusion room. It's just some quiet time, and so it's quite common that everybody does. They take a break from the wedding for an hour. Other questions about this so far? We can let Russell continue. Your impressions of a Jewish wedding. Go ahead.
Right. One step that I'd skipped that I just remember is like a big thing, like the breaking the glass, and like they had this big commemorative thing they talked about the Beit Mikdash, and then like after this kind of like this speech that went on for like a minute or two, there was like almost like a commemorative song they sang in memory of it, and then they broke the glass, and that was like I guess that was right after the 7 blessings that were read.
Right.
And
they broke the glass. They sang about Jerusalem. Right.
Right, and then that's whenever they came out of the chuppah. All the singing and the dancing started. I mean, that had been going on between each blessing as well.
All right.
Really
the crowd was rowdy, huh? Okay.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And then after, so the Cheder Yichud part, that went on for a while. But I mean, there was hundreds of people and getting everyone seated. It all worked out perfectly.
It worked out. There's time. Usually you have the first course while the couple is having their pictures taken, whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. And it was like a multi-course meal. It was, I'd never been to a wedding that nice in my life before. It was great. Yeah.
Okay. Terrific.
And there was so much singing, and like as soon as the the bride and groom came into the room after everyone had already eaten. Like everyone stood up and immediately just like flocked over to him, started dancing, cheering, clapping, and then that part went on for hours. I mean, they would take breaks, you know, so that people could eat.
Right.
Like for the next.
There was a
course of the meal.
DJ or a band?
There was a band,
A
live
band, a live band. Okay, yeah, it's common, yeah.
Right, and then it went. They set up like a kind of mechitza for women to dance on one side of the room, like where no one would view them, and then the men were on the other side of the room, and the bride and groom were in the middle of their respective circles, or everyone dancing around them.
Nice.
And
We mentioned this before, the issue of mixed dancing. Well, let's finish. The rest will finish the story, then we'll take the questions. Go ahead.
right, and so a lot of food, a lot of dancing. I'd never seen so much joy at a wedding in my life before.
Wow.
It was amazing.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, great. Now, questions. We'll go around the room. David will start.
So there's several levels of subtlety here. There's money, there's contract, there's relations. We're trying to cover all of our bases. Let's say if a couple.
Not at all.
Let's say.
Not at all. We're
Not
not
at all?
covering all our bases. When I was describing a process, we have a tradition of what we do. It's not, I know you're referring to a Mishnah in Kiddushin, which speaks about many different ways
Yes,
that
we have
a
a
marriage can be affected. We don't do all three. We only do one. We only do one. And it's none of the ones mentioned in the Mishnah.
Kesef the ring, be it.
Kesef, ring is not kesef. Kesef is money. We don't
And
do
star is
money.
a ketubah, we do all three.
So star is not the ketubah. The ketubah is not the star. And bia, we don't do it there. We don't do that until later at night.
But we presume it's been done.
So we don't do any of those that are mentioned in the Mishnah. So your opening statement was wrong.
Okay.
We're not covering all our
What's the
bases,
point?
and we're not doing all the forms of acquisition in the Mishnah. We use shaveh kesef. We nowadays the custom is for many years, hundreds of years, that a Jewish marriage is affected by giving of a ring. The ring is something which is worth money, but it's not money, and that's not even mentioned in the Mishnah. So we're very far away, thousands of years away from that, theoretical halachic discussion of the different forms of how a marriage can be affected. We're not trying to cover any of them.
Okay.
We do a totally different system than what stated in the Mishnah 2,000 years. A lot of water under the bridge since that Mishnah, which is it's a very important study to try to understand the underpinnings of the halachic type of how this contract of a marriage works halachically. But that was not a good introduction to your question. What is your question,
I
though?
learned the other in this very building from somebody else, but okay.
Okay.
But the question was, what's the actual moment? It's like, I know obviously before the wedding they're not married.
When she
afterwards,
receives the ring from the
and
husband.
The
That's
ring would
marriage,
be,
that's
if
the marriage.
9/11 happened and she received the ring,
Yes, she would be
that would be the
married.
instant.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
When she puts it on or when she's received it, I'll split hairs further.
He puts it on her finger usually.
It has to be on her finger.
That's how she receives it. That's traditionally how you wear a ring. Yeah. You could put it in her palm if she wants. It doesn't have to be on her finger. It's just
Well,
not
she
as pretty as it.
What if she does her hand? What if she doesn't have
If I
hands?
buy a car, I pick up the
It's not hands.
napkin.
You can put it into her pocket. You can put it into her purse. It's kosher. As long as she receives it, she wants to receive it. It's very important that there has to be will, free will, both on the giver and the receiver. You know, she has to want to receive it and be married. And
Hers
he
or
has
her
to want-
father's?
Hers, absolutely. We're not talking about children here. Yes, please, go ahead.
So, generally speaking, people only get married once.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. And it's not something that it's a process. There's a lot of things that happen over the course of the days leading up and on the actual day.
Right, we jumped to
yeah.
the highlight. But
Yeah.
Of course, there's dating and
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not saying about. I'm talking about like the practice, like brachot and things like that.
What are you speaking about?
Well, like the wedding, a lot of like under the chuppah, a lot of
of stages.
a lot of stuff was being read, a lot of
Yeah.
brachot were being said.
A lot of
There was a
elements.
lot of there was the seven walkings around, all that stuff.
Okay.
How does one like practice before like obviously if you practiced with her beforehand, it could be problematic because you could be accidentally fulfilling
One of
the
those.
obligation. So would you
yeah.
would you do it with a friend, like two guys? Like I mean, two guys get married, but like because two guys cannot get married, you would practice use it with a friend beforehand.
Well,
to
I'll answer your
practice.
question. What would you need to practice?
I'll answer your question. Let me answer.
Make sure that you remember what to do in order.
So, by all means, every bit of public performance is scary, and especially weddings. There's dress rehearsals of every show and every hundreds of people you're performing in front of, even though it's your own personal moment. It's a little bit surprising, such an intimate personal moment, but it's a mitzvah to celebrate it with the community. So sure, there's nerves, and you want to do everything right, so you would want to practice. And the truth is, I've heard people get scared about this as well. And I think it's a little bit undue. Nothing really is halachically valid unless you want it to happen. And in the case of Kiddushin, there has to be kosher witnesses as well. So people, for example, would say, oh, I shouldn't give any gifts to my fiancée because then maybe it'll be marrying her. If you don't intend to marry her, I don't care how many gifts you give her, you're not going to be marrying her by giving her a gift. And even if you do intend to marry her, and you give her a gift, if there's no egging there, it's not going to be kosher. So there's no problem giving gifts and practicing. You could practice even with her if you want. You could practice giving her a ring. As long as you don't mean it, it's not kosher, it's not valid. But especially, usually, if you do such a thing, you would do it privately. And so there wouldn't be any aid-in, so there's really nothing to worry about.
You wouldn't have
However,
the Rob there to make sure you're doing everything right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. However, what the way the ceremony has been structured, because many brides and grooms, it's their first time. Hopefully, most of them it's their first time, and they've never done it before, and they're nervous and excited. Almost the entire ceremony and all these different elements are done with the aid of a rabbi and friends and relatives, and so you don't have to do much.
So there's
as a chatan, there's not much to practice. There's one line you have. You can practice that. Memorize it. Say it to yourself in front of a mirror 10 times, and you'll be ready. That's it. Everything else you're told, go here, stand here, do this. Okay, take the ring, put it on her finger. Practice that. How hard is it to put a ring on someone's finger? You don't really. It's hard to mess up. It's really hard to mess up. So we make it very simple. And so there's really not much practicing that you have to do, other than you're ushered. This stage, that stage. Now go to the room for 5 minutes. Now sign here, sign there. The chatan and kala, many chatan and kala get married and they are ignorant and not very savvy at public speaking, but it's fine. Most of the chatanim and kalot, when I officiate in weddings, I feed them the words, word for word. Arei, at, mekudesh, li, with the batzah. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody expects that. Yeah, the chatan's not going to remember. You try to memorize it 100 times. You'll blank because you're so excited and you're so nervous on the spot. So that's why I also have it written down on a card in case somebody wants to read it, or I recite it for them word by word. I feed them the words, and that's perfectly okay. So really, there's no need for practice, and there's no need for worry even if you do practice. So I hope that allays your fears, Moshe. And we can move on to the next question. Somebody else wanted to speak? Going down the list? You're good? You're good? Hershey.
So, when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt as an Hashem, will we continue to do the smashed in the glass? Because it's meant to remind us of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash.
I assume not. I assume we don't have to break the glass if the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt. It's an interesting point. The ceremony will change. Another question, Thomas.
What is the reason why the kuppah must be highly set outside and not inside?
So it doesn't have to be. There's different customs. The Ashkenazi custom is to try to have it outdoors under the sky, under the stars. Sephardim usually do it indoors. Where did this custom come from? I'm trying to remember now. I think it might have, the technical answer is when you have a big crowd of people, you don't always have such a big hall, have room for everybody. But there's certainly something very romantic about being under the stars. But I'm trying to remember what sources are quoted about this idea of getting married outdoors, specifically. I mean, there is this brit covenant between God and the world, not to destroy the world. And so now the bride and groom are making a covenant, pact between them to be faithful to each other. And so the marriage is, like we were speaking about in the previous classes, marriage in many ways is a completion of the world, the creation of the world. God created the world. It's described in the 6 days of creation many times that there's a separation. The heavens and the earth, the waters from the land, right? The moon from the sun. There's a lot of separation going on. And our job, God tells us when He creates man, is to make union, to come together, right? To unite heaven and earth. So I think symbolically that might be the connection of why this custom developed to have it outdoors, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm not entirely sure. I can't recall specifically a source which discusses that custom right now, but there's many, many books on the subject. There's actually one book, it's called The Book of Customs. The Reasons for the Customs. It's a great book. And it goes through, it's a couple hundred pages, and it goes through all aspects of Jewish life, and it explains, one short paragraph. There's one in the library, actually, in English, a similar volume, where they go through, what's it called? Something about, why the whys of Jewish practice, or something like that. But so this one, it's not a specific law. It's kosher indoors or outdoors. But this custom in Ashkenazi communities developed that they have the weddings outdoors. My wedding, even though I'm Ashkenazi, was indoors.
My brother's was indoors.
It was pouring cats and dogs, as they say. Ruben, your question.
Can I please ask a halakhic question about weddings in general?
This is the forum for such a question.
So, I would think that if a man holds a woman hostage and says, you have to marry me or else I kill you, goes to kosher witnesses, that it's not a valid wedding. That would be my guess.
If she's under duress, yes.
Okay. What about the other way around? Let's say you're walking down the street and there's a young lady who really, really wants to get married and has a gun and says, hey, you have to marry me. We have to go to the Beit Din or else I will pull the trigger. So drags him to the Beit Din, and is that a halakhic wedding? Is that a halakhic marriage?
I think the same answer. If it's under duress, it's not valid. Okay. Listen, it's more complicated. Obviously, it depends on there's a lot of circumstances. But the bottom line is, you need intention for marriage. If you're just doing the external act, it's not valid. Yes, Yossi.
What, in your opinion, what do you do when, say, like for example, my brother, he invited two rabbis, one being the rabbi he goes under, for most of his learnings and whatnot, and then you have the family rabbi who basically brought us up in the same community of customs. When it comes to a wedding, in your opinion, who is he supposed to go by?
Good question. You guys know how much I love rabbinic politics, right? I mentioned this a few times. My favorite part of Judaism is rabbinic politics. I'm being sarcastic, obviously, right? Right. So, but really, the question's a little bit strange because there are many rabbis, and many of us learn and are influenced by many rabbis. It's a good thing to have one rabbi to make, your go-to mentor, because, otherwise you can get lost and sort of, fall between the cracks. And it's good to have somebody to give you guidance, especially in halachic areas. You need, if you're not a scholar yourself, and even if you are a scholar, there's always things that you need help with. So it's very important to have a rabbi that you choose as your rabbi. Now, you can choose a number of rabbis, but it's up to you. It's very hard to say, who are you responsible to? Who do you have to honor? This is really a question of...
say that, which is why I asked in your opinion, who do you think you should choose? Do you think that there's one right or wrong? Or...
So the rabbi you choose to marry you has a lot of factors to consider. Number one thing is who you feel close to, and who you feel will do a good job, knows to do a proper halachic wedding, all important things. But also another very important factor to consider is
What the bride wants.
yeah, what the other side wants. Maybe your bride has a rabbi and she wants someone, and so that's the first thing to think about.
You get all of them in an arena, and they all fight each other to see who gets.
That's it. That's the fight of rabbis.
You invite them all for a study. You invite them all for a study session, and you pay attention to their thinking.
That's it.
Whoever stays up longest wins.
The truth is, the best answer that I can give you is what I always say about customs and joining, Ashkenazi customs, Sephardi customs, and some people are doing conversion here and they get to choose. I always say what's important more so than the past is the future. And in other words, you should be looking for a rabbi that you're going to have access to, that you want to have a relationship with in the future, because there's always going to be questions that come up. And so I'd say that's most important, is to develop that relationship with a rabbi that you want to stay in touch with, not necessarily, well, I really loved my third grade Rebbe, and I really, my father loved that rabbi, and he was, very important to him, but, I'm never going to speak to him again in my life. I would say that's second to the rabbi in the community where you're going to be living, and you'll be hopefully going to his shir every week and asking him questions whenever you have questions of halacha. So that's I think a primary consideration, is to have a relationship with a rabbi that you can continue. Okay, next question. Other questions? No? David? No? Good. Yeah, Nisim, yeah.
In terms of the halachic cultivation of a marriage, so you say we do shaveh kesef, right?
Yes.
What
A ring.
A ring. So that's what we do now.
That's how we do. Yeah. There's some people.
You give like a money, like bills.
You could theoretically, but it's considered to be coarse and unrefined. It's Jewish custom already to use a ring is ancient, hundreds and hundreds of years. We use shaveh kesef. We don't do any of the three. Right? Correct. Yeah, Russell, and then I'll go back if I have time. Yeah.
Another step that I guess I just forgot about, was that there's all a lot happening at once. They read the ketubah under the
chuppah, right?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
In that moment, does it, after I guess the ketubah is signed and it's read out, or maybe after it's signed or out loud, like, does it go from being an engagement to betrothal in that moment? Does it like?
So let me clear that up. Just I won't say once and for all, because I'm sure we'll cover it again. But it's a very confusing business, because nowadays in modern English and Hebrew, we use the terms engagement and marriage as two very different things than the way the terms were used in our sources. And right nowadays, to be engaged means you plan and intend to be married, and you publicly announce it. That's what engagement is. And marriage is when you actually get married. Okay, so that's the common usage. In our halachic sources, all the way back to the Torah, the terms are used totally differently. The words in Hebrew for engagement are erusin and nisuin. So you can be an arus or an arusa because you're engaged, the female or male, and you could be nasui, meaning you're married, right? Or nisu'ah for the feminine, right? So these are the two stages: engagement and marriage. Engagement and marriage, and we all know what they mean. In our sources, in the Torah, erusin means something totally different. Erusin means marriage. So, but there's another stage. There's two stages of marriage. Marriage, first stage 1 is erusin. Marriage stage 2 is nisuin. What word is used for what we call today engagement? That's usually called, in our sources, shiduchin. Shiduchin means when you are looking for a shiduch, and the result is when you finally plan, or what we would say, get engaged, that's called when you finalize the shidduch. So, in the Torah and our subsequent sources, Erusin really is the beginning of the marriage already. And that's when the Torah describes what if a woman gets caught having relations. She's called a Na'ara HaMe'orasa. She is to be put to death because it's adultery. Okay? This is a capital offense, adultery. We don't have capital punishment today, of course, for many, many years. But Erusin is the first stage of marriage. Okay? They're both stages of marriage. The difference was that in the ancient times, the Erusin and the Nisuin were not together on the same day. Right. The classic custom was you would get married but not live together. You'd get married, meaning you'd give the girl a ring. You asked before, what's the critical moment? It's when you give her a ring and you say, Hareyat Mekudeshetli. You are now. By the way, there's another word for this. This might be more familiar to you. Kiddushin. Kiddushin. Hareyat Mekudeshetli is equivalent to the stage of Erusin in the biblical terminology and the rabbinic terminology. Kiddushin is the Erusin. Then, whether it's 12 months later or 6 months later, or nowadays we do it on the same day, the next stage is Nisuin. Nisuin is when they live together. How do we do the Nisuin today? We mentioned it earlier. We have the chuppah, and then the cheder yichud, and then when you go home later at night, there's different stages. But this is a full halachic marriage. Okay? And so Erusin is part of the marriage. And so when do we read the ketubah? In between the Erusin and the Nisuin. He gives her the ring. They're officially married. First thing when you get married, he has to give her a ketubah. It's not a marriage effecting document, like mentioned in the Mishnah. It's essentially a prenup. It says if anything goes wrong, it's a seatbelt. If anything goes wrong, we have to take care of the kala. That's what the ketubah is. And they're standing under the chuppah. So really, nowadays we do them almost simultaneously. The Erusin and the Nisuin come together, and we don't make this protracted. These two parts, stage 1 and stage 2, are pretty much simultaneous. They're not. There's no difference because they found that it made trouble. Things would happen on the way, and so we wait. We do shidduchim. In other words, we announce our modern day engagement that we plan to get married. We send out invitations to the wedding. We make plans, but halachically, you don't start the process of marriage till you get to the hall on the day of the wedding. Then you do the Erusin and the Nisuin, or the Kiddushin and the Nisuin, almost at the same time, one right after the other. Russell, does that answer your question?
It does. So at what point does it technically move from shidduchim to Erusin?
Giving the ring.
Giving the ring. Okay.
Giving the ring. The actual marriage only starts, and the day of the wedding, you put the veil over her. You missed that stage, but there's a few stages on that day, but it's all on that day. Right. It's all on the day of the wedding. Yeah, David.
At least in Israel, I've seen haggling taking place over the ketubah. Literally, on more than one occasion, literally, they're about to have the wedding. Is there a reason that it's done that close to the wedding and they haven't?
It's actually very rare. It's not quite haggling, and you'd have to, really.
That it couldn't have been done earlier, or people just being coarse?
The ketubah is a legal document. It has to be signed the day of, and you can't pre-sign it.
Right, but the terms of it.
Terms can be determined whenever you want.
Is there a reason that it can't
It's largely ceremonial. The ketubah nowadays, it's largely ceremonial. These terms are almost meaningless. But it's a halachic document. It's a legal document. It's valid in Israeli courts. So we do treat it. And usually, when you see the rabbis are sitting around the table discussing it, there's no haggling. It's not a question of, I'll give you 5 camels. No, I want 7 camels. That's total legend. That's myth. That's not true. That's not haggling about the sums of the ketubah. That never happens. Okay? Now there could be arguments. wherever there's Jews, there's arguments, right? But that's not haggling over the ketubah. Probably a misunderstanding. So we'll clear that up. Yes, Nisim, one more.
What's the point? So I'm aware that they wait a very long time from the time they announce the engagement until doing the marriage. Why can't they just? What's the point of waiting?
You have to prepare.
But
You have to prepare. You have to prepare. There's a lot of technical things. Once you're married, you have to have a place to live, and you have to have an income, and you have to prepare the wedding feast, and the bride has to find the dress, and etc., etc. There's a lot of preparation. The truth is, I'll just once we're at it, I'll complete the picture for you. In the day, many communities don't do this anymore. At the shidduchim, many times, and here you might have haggling. They write a document called Tnaim. Tnaim literally means conditions, or Tnoim in the Ashkenazi pronunciation. And in the original day, it was a contract between the families. We're going to buy the chicken for the wedding, and you're going to buy the linens, and we're going to provide the house, and you're going to provide the dowry. All that is part of the. Well, dowry is a little bit more complicated. We won't use that word because we'll talk about it another time. But nowadays, some people actually put it down in a document. Usually, you just discuss it and make agreements. But it's a very traditional document, and so some people want to sign it anyways. When do they sign it? Only here, on the day of the wedding. What's the point of signing an agreement? Everything's been paid for already. Everything's been divided up. So there is a new version of the Tanaim, but some people just skip the Tanaim nowadays, and we just go straight to the Erusin and Nisun. Yeah.
What was in earlier times when there was a difference between stage 1 and 2? What was the normal time for?
1 year.
1 year?
1 year.
A year?
Yeah. Between the Erusin and Nisun, yeah.
Why was it so long?
I think the assumption was that the husband has to get a job and build a house. Get a job and build a house. And it takes a while to build a house and get things ready for his wife. Okay? We'll stop here for today and go to the next class. Have a good one.